This is a follow-up to the previous video I made concerning evidence for the tall white aliens and the Charles Hall story. In my previous videos, I documented multiple objects in the desert that seemed to match both the location and description of tall white alien objects inside the Nellis Test and Training Range, as given by Charles Hall. I also documented my first Freedom of Information Act request to the Air Force to request identification of these objects, which the Air Force refused, citing lack of information. In my efforts to get more information, I consulted a friend who is retired from the Air Force. He looked at the objects in question and suggested that perhaps these objects were wildlife guzzlers. Wildlife guzzlers are used to collect rainwater for wildlife where there are no other sources of water. With this bit of information, I began to research and prepare to submit another Freedom of Information Act request to the Air Force. I was able to locate these images of wildlife guzzlers, which seemed to resemble the structures in the Nevada Test and Training Range. I was able to locate a declassified briefing that was given by the 98th Range Wing. In this briefing, it explicitly mentions interagency projects concerning wildlife guzzler, aerial survey, and repair. This was clear documentation that the Air Force may have dealings with these objects, if in fact they are wildlife guzzlers. It should also be noted that this would give the Air Force an easy way to derail any further research by claiming that these were indeed wildlife guzzlers. As I conducted my research, I discovered that in 2011, the 98th Range Wing had been redesignated the Nevada Test and Training Range and would report directly to the U.S. Air Force Warfare Center. With this information, on February 19, 2013, I filed a second Freedom of Information Act request with the Air Force. Here is the text of that request. This request should be directed to the Nevada Test and Training Range, which was formally designated prior to June 21, 2011 as the 98th Range Wing at Nellis Air Force Base. I was looking at the area north of Creech Air Force Base in Google Earth and found several structures inside of the Nevada Test and Training Range many miles away from roads. A friend of mine has suggested that they were wildlife guzzlers. I did some research on the web and learned that your office has dealings with aerial survey and repair of wildlife guzzlers in the Nevada Test and Training Range. I was hoping that maybe you could identify these objects listed below. Are they wildlife guzzlers? Also, if you have closer photos of these objects, I'd appreciate it if you could share them with me. Furthermore, can you provide me a listing or map of all wildlife guzzlers in the NTTR? Below are 3 links to Google Maps that mark the objects in question. You'll have to zoom in close to see them, but they are obvious. A large tan-colored rectangle and 3 white oval objects close by. Later on that day, within hours of submitting my request, I received this message from the Air Force, which read, Mr. Hilton, your case will be placed on hold for clarification. Based on your initial email, your FOIA request doesn't meet the threshold of being perfected. Please respond to my email by February 18th with a more clear description of what you are seeking. If you don't respond by the suspense date, your FOIA request will be closed out. So in order to keep them from arbitrarily closing my FOIA request, I called the number provided. I only started recording the phone call when the FOIA agent began giving me the runaround on the phone, so the very beginning of the call is missing. The following is the phone conversation.
We can go ahead and start processing your case.
Okay, I'm backing out here so I can see the
Sure.
reading of my FOIA, because I thought it was pretty clear what I requested.
Okay, this request should be directed to the Nevada Test Training Range, which was formerly designated prior to. I was looking at the area north of you. So what exactly are you seeking?
Okay, well, as I said at the very beginning of my request, I'm requesting this go to Nellis Air Force Base, which is the unit used to be called the 98th Range Wing, which has been redesignated to the Nevada Test Training Range. That's literally what they're called now. The objects that I saw north of Creech Air Force Base, me and several friends, we believe that they are wildlife guzzlers. Okay, basically collect rainwater to water wildlife. Okay.
Sure.
I did a little research. Apparently, the 98th Range Wing, formerly, they have a briefing that's you can find online where they discuss that they do aerial survey and repair of wildlife guzzlers. So therefore, I'm filing this request with them to see if they can provide me with information on their wildlife guzzlers inside the Nevada Test and Training Range. And if possible, if they will provide me with a map or locations, or if they can even identify the object as being a wildlife guzzler. And that's why at the bottom of the FOIA request you see 3 sets of coordinates and also 3 links to Google Maps.
Okay, I tell you what, sir, I will open this case back up and send to Nellis.
Okay, and just for clarification, what was the original reasoning that it was closed?
No, it's actually the case is not closed. It was just placed on hold for, I guess, only for clarification only.
Okay, so that's why I'm not following here. I mean, it seems pretty clear to me. So,
yes, but and I do understand now exactly what you're asking for, and I will tell the Nellis and manager to process this case here.
Okay. All right. Well, and your name one more time?
Oh, sure. First name is and I can be reached as
Okay. All right. All right. Thank you very much for your help. And I guess about a month or so I'll hear back from this or something like that.
Hope not. Anyway, right?
All right. No. All right. Well, thank you very much for your help, sir.
No problem, sir.
Have a good day.
You have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.
So after that, my Freedom of Information Act request was allowed to proceed to Nellis Air Force Base. On March 5, 2013, I received the following response from Nellis Air Force Base denying any knowledge. It was obvious at this point that any further request for information from the Air Force would be a waste of time. I had documented Air Force involvement and provided very specific details as to the description and location of the objects in question. I then decided to turn my attention to other U.S. government agencies that may be involved, namely the Nevada Office of the Bureau of Land Management and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I had previously prepared emails for each and sent them on February 19, 2013. The Bureau of Land Management responded and recommended that I contact the Department of Defense since they manage the Nevada Test and Training Range. Perhaps by coincidence, this response also came on March 5, 2013, the very same day that the Air Force sent their response denying any knowledge. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service never did respond to my email request. During the month of March, I continued my research. I was able to locate a map buried in an obscure briefing about the Desert National Wildlife Refuge from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. This map was titled Desert Bighorn Sheep Habitat. On the map were locations marked as man-made water catchments. These locations exactly matched the locations of the objects I had located inside the Nevada Test and Training Range. It is important to note that the official cover story, as stated by Charles Hall many times, is that the tall white aliens are referred to as bighorn sheep. On April 4, 2013, with still no response from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, I sent them an email again requesting information. On April 8, 2013, I received a response from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. It stated that they had forwarded my request to Creech Air Force Base Public Affairs Office. Two things are interesting about this response. Below their response, you can see the inter-office comment made by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Public Affairs Officer, referring to my email stating, "Here is a duplicate of that questionable email again." Furthermore, at the bottom of the email, you can see that the responding official is a special agent with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Office of Law Enforcement. Why would a simple request for information be called, quote, questionable, and forwarded to a special agent? On April 9, 2013, I received another email from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. In this email, a biologist with the Nevada Department of Wildlife informed me that the objects I had located were wildlife guzzlers. To be honest, this is the response I expected. It labels the objects in such a way that it deflects attention from them. Again, the official cover story, as stated by Charles Hall many times, is that the tall white aliens are referred to as bighorn sheep. And now we are told that what we are seeing is the bighorn sheep habitat.
And you'll notice off on the right is Dogbone Lake. Okay, that's inside Dreamland. Dreamland includes the western part of the desert southwest game ranges, where the cover story is that if you're out there and you see something white, pretend it's a bighorn sheep. The aliens, as we'll see in a few slides later, have very large eyes, and when you see them looking at you above the sagebrush, it's easy to mistake them for bighorn sheep, especially if you're terrified, and I speak from direct experience. And you'll notice off on the right is Dogbone Lake. Okay, that's inside Dreamland. Dreamland includes the western part of the desert southwest game ranges, where the cover story is that if you're out there and you see something white, pretend it's a bighorn sheep. The aliens, as we'll see in a few slides later, have very large eyes, and when you see them looking at you above the sagebrush, it's easy to mistake them for bighorn sheep, especially if you're terrified, and I speak from direct experience.